Hello, Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time visiting. I am going to be taking you guys on a deep dive into one of my favorite decks ever, the Deviant Moon Tarot. I am excited to get into this. We're not going to be spending a ton of time on this book, but I do want to talk about it before we get into the deck itself. We are going to be spending the majority of our time talking about the basic mass market borderless edition of the Deviant Moon Tarot. But first, this needs to be discussed. This is the only mass market deck I've ever seen come out. Not saying it's the only one, it's the only one I know about that has ever had such an enormous coffee table style book made about it. Patrick Valence's Deviant Moon Tarot is a really, really unique deck, and this book is definitely worth getting if you are enchanted by his artwork. Now, this was sent to me as a gift, and it is just really, really special. We're going to take a quick little flip through so you can see what it's all about. But the Deviant Moon Tarot book is really a deep dive, not only into the meaning of the cards, but a lot of information about the background of the deck, how it came about, how it was created, its origin story, so to speak. And then when you do get into the card descriptions, you do get this gorgeous, big, vibrant version of the card artwork. And then you get a write-up that describes what's happening in the card, the upright reversed meaning, and then a whole lot of background about that card. So here's the Magician, same thing. You get this, like, look at this artwork. The High Priestess. Here's some extra information. The Empress, and so on. And it does this all the way through the book, including the minor arcana. So here's an example of the Five of Wands, same amount of text. Here's some background stuff, some concept sketches, tons and tons of stuff. If like different variations of the card that have evolved over time, all kinds of stuff. Here's our Nine of Cups. It's really a fun book. Now, unfortunately, it's not very practical to carry this around with you, say, when you're working with the deck, but I really love this Five of Cups. But it's really wonderful if you want to appreciate the details in the artwork, because the artwork in this deck is incredible. So I just wanted to do a quick nod to this book. This book is like something like $50 US, I think, to buy. It's quite a thing. But it's pretty spectacular. So if you find yourself falling in love with the Deviant Moon Tarot and this intrigues you, I definitely recommend you give it a look. I will have a link to it down below in case you want to check it out. But it's definitely a really, really unique thing to have. But with that out of the way, let's dive into the actual deck. And I really want to spend time doing a walkthrough of the cards and showing you kind of what I think and why I treasure this deck so much. So before I do the card by card walkthrough, I know I'm going to keep doing that. Before I do that, I want to talk about what my experience with this deck was, how it came to be in my collection, and how I use it. So essentially, every time I saw the Deviant Moon Tarot on videos, on people's channels, whenever I saw pictures of it, I was super creeped out. I thought the artwork was just really dark and scary, and I didn't get it. I didn't get why this was appealing to people. It just seems spooky to be spooky. Like, I couldn't figure it out, and I was vocally against this deck. I thought it was just awful. I mean, I'm not going to pull punches because I really did say that a lot. Like, it's super creepy. I don't like it. It's icky. And then one day, I don't know what it was, I was curious. So I picked up a copy in my local bookstore and I brought it home. And the moment I started seeing it in person, the artwork just, it's got so much depth and vibrancy. And gosh, it's really hard to put into words. This is one of those decks that I feel like you don't really know if it's gonna speak to you until you're holding it in your hands. And I can't quite describe why it has that quality, but it certainly seems to. And then the next thing I noticed is that every single image seemed to have a bit of a twist, a bit of a peek into the darkness. It does have this sort of dreamlike or nightmarish-like almost quality of the artwork. And it helped me, I realized, to suddenly be able to see some of the shadowier meanings of the cards much, much easier. It's as if it took all of the pretty layers off of a standard tarot deck and like showed its seedy underbelly. And it's not to say that I couldn't do a regular tarot reading with this deck. I could, but I quickly found that it just made it easier for me to see the icky side of a lot of the cards. And the reason that was helpful to me was because I recognized that with that being the case with this deck, I had the ability then to do readings looking at or looking for the things that are maybe uncomfortable or that I don't want to look at. And this deck really, really helped me to do that. Now, it still doesn't mean that every time I pull a card, I'm like, oh, this is a bad card. That's not what I mean. It's just that for some reason, like here in the Five of Swords, you can see a bit of the bratty energy, right? So we'll talk about that more as we go through each individual card and I give my kind of opinion and impressions of it. But it became my go-to deck for doing shadow work, as we kind of colloquially call doing the work where we're looking at the uncomfortable stuff, or we're looking at pieces of ourself, our own energy, our own attitude, our own behavior that we'd rather not. This deck has become a really effective tool for that for me, and is definitely my go-to for that kind of work. So with that said, let's talk about the deck itself. So it's a US Games deck, and this version of it at the time I'm filming is still available. It's the borderless version of the Deviant Moon. You can also get a version of this deck that is not this shape. So this is kind of tall and narrow. The standard deck comes in a tuck box and has a little bit of a black border that goes all the way around, and it's more of the standard tarot shape. This borderless edition comes in a tuck box, if I recall correctly, and it is borderless on 3 sides, but you still have the titles at the bottom. So that's the format. This is what the backings of the cards look like. I think they're just really, really beautiful. And it does come with this little white book, which should not be ignored, because it's got really decent little write-ups, enough that you can really wrap your head around what Patrick Valenza, the creator of this deck, is trying to do in the artwork. There are even some spreads in here, such as the Lunatic spread. It's not insubstantial as little white books go, and I felt like it really, really helped me to get to know this deck, particularly in the beginning. So don't discount the little white book. It's helpful. And sometimes working with a deck that takes you outside your comfort zone, it is helpful to have a book to refer to, and it does have both upright and reversed meanings, as well as a description of what you see on the card. So everything you need is there. So there you go. So now let's get zoomed in on the artwork, and I'll start giving my impressions and opinions. So we start with the Fool, and it always struck me how he's diving through this pond, seemingly in his pajamas, while piranhas are nibbling at his feet. So you can tell he's in a not safe space, right? He's not safe. He's definitely in dangerous waters, but he seems completely oblivious to any danger, which is, of course, the nature of the Fool. The Magician card here, with his extra arms and being on display, we see there's shadows. So there's a crowd of people around him, and he's got his finger in this cup of wine? Question mark, could be blood. He's got his fingers in that, and he does have all the tools. He's got the coin, the wand, the sword, and the cup, so you can look at it that way. But I also like that he looks like a performer. It feels like more of a nod to the original Marseille and historical decks that had this same quality. So we get the idea that he could be there could be sleight of hand things going on, there could be trickery things going on. Everything I need is here, but I see more of the manipulator and the performer in this artwork. This High Priestess is so interesting to me because she's closed off. Her body posture is very closed off over her heart space. And she has this very dualistic nature to her. We see now one of the first cards. Is this the first card where we see this? Yes, it is. So this is the first card where we see the two faces. So we have the sort of moon side here and the dark shadow of the moon back here. And the moon side on her, I guess on our visual left here, is the white or the light side of the moon. But then hidden back here is the dark side of the moon. And on the dark side, the eyes are closed, or the eye is closed, and on the light side it's open. So you get a lot of that energy of secrets coming through. Little known fact, but I think it's real. I shouldn't say it's little known, but a fact that I think is really cool about the creation of this deck. A lot of the textures, which is one of the most visually stimulating things about this deck in my opinion, but the textures were taken from old cemeteries. So Patrick Valenza would take scans or photographs of tombstones and other pieces of decor and architecture, whatnot at cemeteries, and would incorporate those textures into his artwork. Fascinating, but you can really see it in her wings here. But this High Priestess always seems to me to be somebody who is blocking her heart. She's being guarded, and there's this idea that you can't access her easily or right away. And there's definitely that feeling of secrets with that dark side of the moon shrouded there. Our Empress, and she's not pregnant, which is something a lot of people talk about. She's still in a lush garden, and she's literally creating life. It's as if this piece of vine is part of her tail, and it's coming up and it's wrapping around her arm, ending in this beautiful flower. So she's literally blossoming, which is super cool. And we get the idea, though, that she's got some ferocity to her. she doesn't have that dualistic face, so you have the idea that she could be, like, what you see is what you get. Like, she's more exposed in the sense that she is who she is, and you can see her. So she's not guarded and secretive like our high priestess is. And she's got 4 breasts. Well, 3 that we can see, but the 4th is implied. So we have that idea of being the nurturer, the sustainer. Our emperor is very evenly matched with our empress here. And it's interesting how they're looking towards each other this way, very much away from each other this way. They're both clearly the regal rulers of the major arcana, so that way they're very well matched. I think it's interesting that he's got a staff of power, which is common for the emperor card, but its tip is crowned by the moon, as opposed to a more masculine symbol. So you get that idea of his connection to the divine feminine is still there. But we see the shadowy side of the emperor here as his staff of power and his foot are both resting on this small beast that he is clearly in charge of. But you get the feeling of overpowering versus ruling in a compassionate or considerate kind of way. I need to get that glare dealt with. Okay, there we go. A little better. Here we have our Hierophant. Again, I go right to the shadowier meaning. So the Hierophant being that nod to tradition, to religious structure or governmental structure, but you have this idea of structure or red tape kind of happening. This leader that's leading from a place of this is how it's always been done. And here again, we see the secretive nature of that dark moon side of the face. And here he's praying, but he looks kind of squished and uncomfortable, like as if he's not sitting in a space of authenticity, but rather one that he's conformed to in order to fit sort of society's ideals. And we have a little figure in his pocket. And that's such an allegory, I feel like, for the idea of people in power having certain people that kind of coo and fawn all over them. And could that be you? Like, are you the Hierophant? Are you the little figure? Are you just, bowing to authority because it's authority? It's interesting to me. I love this Lovers because I love how wrapped up in one another these two figures are. I also like the alchemy of one dark and one light, the feeling of balancing one another out. If you look closely, the moon is sort of blessing their union with this light that's sort of shining down directly on them. But there's this little snake that's biting the ankle of one of them, and that figure hasn't even seemed to notice. So there's a little bit of like not necessarily heeding the dangers, a little bit of a more mature version of a fool kind of energy in a way. Like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm kind of avoiding the risk. This Chariot is interesting to me because it's like a head on wheels. It's got a very almost steampunky vibe, and you'll notice there's this sort of dark industrial feeling to the Deviant Moon in general. But what's interesting to me about this is it's like the head is on wheels, and that's fascinating because the Chariot card is a card all about your mental drive and fortitude and the ways in which you're like focusing forward on what's in front of you, and you're guiding that with your attention and your focus and your determination. So it's all very mental in the Chariot. It's not physical at all. And so having this literal head on wheels just really makes sense. It's like keeping the focus where it's intended to be. And here we have Justice. And again, we have that secretive side, that dark side, and that light side. But here it feels more balanced because both sides of the face, rather, are facing directly at you. The two sides are holding the sword evenly. So you get the idea that justice is going to be, it's going to cut fairly, I guess, to either side. Like, there's no bias represented in the card necessarily. And it's like another arm has come out and is holding this fish above this alligator type or lizard type creature that's being held down, presumably with the justice's foot. So there's this idea of justice is not going to decide based on what either character, the fish or the lizard, wants, but rather what is appropriate in the situation. There's no personal feelings with justice. It's like, what is fair, what is equitable, that's what's going to happen. This is where we often see consequences to actions, things like that, and I see that reflected in the artwork. This Hermit is one of my favorites because I dislike it. I feel like a lot of times the Hermit is one of those cards that it's very easy to sort of hold up as like, look, it's spiritual awakeness, awareness, knowledge, growth. This Hermit, though, is the shadowier side of like being a hermit in a way that we're hiding from things because we don't want to face it. We don't want to learn and grow, so we run away, we hide, we avoid. This speaks to that avoidance and that sort of fear-driven isolation that is so common, and that is such an archetype for how a lot of us deal with things when they get really tough. Is we don't want to like move into it and grow with it. We kind of want to avoid it because we're uncomfortable, right? And I feel like this Hermit just calls that out so perfectly. Here we have the Wheel of Fortune. I love this. This feels like a spin the wheel game at some kind of carnival, and our figure is just like waiting to see how it's going to turn out. And there's that sort of like worry and like anxiety and also anticipation. Like, am I going to win? Am I going to lose? Like, how's this going to turn out? That's very much the energy of the Wheel of Fortune. Everything is very much subject to the Wheel of Fate. That's the whole point of this card. And I just think it's really aptly illustrated here. Strength. This is a card that, how do I describe this? Typically, I like to see strength being a gentle, nurturing, harmonizing kind of coming into one's strength, coming into one's empowerment. And I don't like seeing this like overpowering, almost bully-like energy. However, in this deck, it really works because it feels like it shows the raw, hard, like tough parts of this work. For me, strength often indicates the kind of work of facing and looking down, like looking into the belly of the thing that we're afraid of about ourselves, looking at the shadow directly, looking at it and going, I may not like it, but I can learn how to work with it rather than letting it overpower me. So this feels like a very disempowering card on one hand, but on the other hand, it helps me to look at strength in a non-rose colored glasses kind of way, which I find really helpful. But to me, yeah, strength is about harmonizing or working with, learning how to not let the things we don't like about ourselves or the difficult parts of ourselves sort of rule us, but rather we get to be in charge. And this shows like the real grit and determination that is required to do that kind of work. And I mean, there's more places I can take this, but this deck speaks to me in a number of ways. I love the Hanged Man here. We see our figure is hanging just as traditional. It looks pretty relaxed, but I love the little pocket watch that's dangling from our character's foot, because it speaks directly to that pensive, waiting, allowing for right timing. It just, that clock there dangling just brings, I think, the meaning of the card into laser focus with the idea of just, it's not time right now. We have to wait. Death, card 13. This actually throws people off, which is interesting. I don't know that I really noticed it initially, but I do know this about historical decks. Historical tarot decks would not ever write the word death on the 13th major arcana. Instead, it would just have its number and that was it. It was a superstitious type thing. And so that tradition is continued in the Deviant Moon Tarot, where we go from a deck that has, or from artwork that has this banner along the bottom with the title, to no banner and no title. And this death card is really disturbing in a weird way to look at, but what's happening here is this figure has been born and is trying to fight its way back into the womb, right? And what's interesting about this is because this is what happens with death for a lot of us. Whether it is whatever has died and we're working to come to terms with letting go of, death often feels like, but I don't want it. Like, I don't want this to change. I want things to go back the way they were. And that's our process of coming to terms with whatever it is that has ended, whatever it is that is transitioning, is that we have this inclination or this desire to fight against it. And we're seeing that happening in this card. We don't want to do the new thing, right? We don't want to go into the new way of living. We want to stay in the old way. And this really shows that happening. And in the background, there's a ship that's actually sunk or sinking. And the thing about death, the death card in the tarot, is it really speaks to inevitable change. Change you can't stop or halt. Change you need to accept. And often shedding or letting go of something that it's long past time to shed or let go of. So in this case, it's no longer appropriate to be in the womb. You're out now. It has to stay out. Like, that's how it's going to be. Really, really fascinating stuff. The Temperance card is so lovely and soothing to me, particularly after the darkness and the difficulty in some of the prior cards. But here she's very calm, she's very centered, and she looks very peaceful, and a lot of that is done with color. I mean, if we look at a lot of the color elsewhere in the deck, it's very bold and it's very dark, and here she's got this soothing sort of cerulean blue color about her, and the little spiral on her tummy, and she just looks ethereal in contrast, and I love that about this card. Very calming. Temperance to me is about coming away from extremes, finding that point of balance and harmony. It really works. The Devil card is amazing. I mean, we knew the Devil card would be amazing in a deck like this. Here we have this just extra sinister kind of creature, but it kind of is almost so comical in how over the top it is that it reminds me of our tendency maybe as people to scapegoat and blame it on the other, right? Rather than taking responsibility for our own actions. Just where my brain goes. This tower is almost Marseille-like in its simplicity. We have also the perspective that is out of whack, such as we do in a Marseille deck. We have this big tower and these tiny doors and these giant people. This is a common perspective for, like, again, a historical or Marseille deck. I also think it's super interesting that it literally looks almost like a spaceship or an eyeball has shot the tower and is destroying it. Doesn't that look like a spaceship or an eyeball? I mean, but the reason that's interesting to me is because traditionally this card is about spiritual growth, and insight is what is going to shatter that tower and cause it to come crumbling down. And the way that this is not just a random bit of lightning kind of, I think, brings that part of the card to our attention quicker, I guess, than some other decks might, which I think is really interesting. It's a reminder that when the tower's coming crumbling down, it's because we're going through a period of deep insight, of spiritual insight or knowledge. And here we have the Star card. And again, we come back to that really soothing blue color, right? You can't tell me that the colors weren't used incredibly intentionally by Patrick in creating this deck. I love that the star above her head is very, very big and, like, draws your eye. I love that she's got these little, like, I don't know, snaky like tentacle-y things coming out of her head. She looks as if she is almost reaching out or connected to the starlight. This particular one is actually coming out and almost appears to be touching the star over here. So there's this feeling of, like, connection with the universe. I don't know. Maybe I'm just seeing what I want to see, but I guess that's the way this deck speaks to me, so I guess that's okay. This moon card is brilliant, I think, because what happens to so many of us when it's a full moon is we feel a little bit like this. Like the moon is kind of tugging on our strings and influencing us in ways that are sometimes not so helpful. Sometimes they're helpful, but a lot of times not so helpful. The moon often casts things in shadow, and there's illusion, and things look one way, but they really are another. If you can't see the puppet strings, then you don't know what's really going on. You don't know the truth, right? You just see that these figures are dancing. You don't know why or what's happening, you know? And I feel like the moon often points us to those places where there's ambiguity. Things aren't quite so clear. And I love that it's depicted that way. Again, a nod to more historical decks where we would typically see the twins, the alchemical twins in the sun card. Very traditional looking, but the thing that I always tend to go to in the sun card is nudity and the wall. And both of those things are here because I tend to go to the sun card for the concept of authenticity and feeling safe to be authentic. And here we have that as well. We have the garden wall keeping our figures safe, but they're fully exposed by the sun. They're completely nude, so there's a vulnerability and an authenticity to that, and I like that aspect of the sun card. Next, we have Judgment, and here we have our figures kind of rising up out of the tomb, and they're in various degrees of acceptance about their ascendance, so to speak. And again, I shouldn't say again because I haven't said this yet. Judgment for me is a card about being called to evolve in some way, to step into a new way of living your life, and we don't always heed that call. Sometimes we resist it. So our central figure here is like turning away from it and resisting it. He's like, nah, I want to live life the way I have been. This figure here seems to be embracing it with her child. And this figure over here seems almost disempowered by it, which is super interesting. So it gives you different perspectives you can look at. And then quite traditionally, we have our world card where we have nods to the 4 cherubic beasts. We have our central figure who is dancing, and we have the boundary of the Ouroboros going all the way around, creating that sense of completion. And that is it for the majors. That brings us to the minors, and we begin with the wand suit. This Ace of Wands is so potent and gorgeous and beautiful, and I love it so much. There's so much growth and like stuff happening, but the Ace of Wands for me is about creation, inspiration, birthing some new creative project or idea, and all of that is represented here with the baby being birthed, with the wand, with all the growth and the green. You get this idea of like something flourishing or starting, and I just love it. I just love it. In the 2, we're doing the planning and the preparation, right? So in this, there's literal planting happening. So here, there's the idea, right? We're birthing something. So we could think of this very much like a seed. And in the 2, we're preparing, right? We're planning, we're processing, we're considering. And here there's garlic bulbs that are about to be planted. So he's getting ready to dig the hole so he can plant those garlic bulbs. But the 2 is very much about that sort of laying the foundation, right? And then in the 3, we've begun and we're now nurturing what it is that we're growing. For some reason, the wand suit in the Deviant Moon Tarot seems to speak much more directly to the creative process for me than many other decks, and I still don't know entirely why that is. But I love, for example, this feels so much like creative work to me, creative projects. We have these 3 wands, and there's this belly button connection that the central figure has, like as if he's nourishing and feeding these three. And as a result, he's also getting moonlight. The moon is actually also consciously contributing to that. It's almost as though by this figure pouring so much of himself into this work, he's also being blessed by external forces to support his work as well. And then here we have our Four of Wands, the card that I like to think of as a milestone card. And you'll notice, by the way, I forgot to mention it. After the Ace of Wands, you stop getting titles in your back to just numbers and beautiful borderless artwork cards, which I think is just brilliant. And it's really easy to see what suit you're in because the wands are so prominent in all of the wands cards, just like the coins are and the cups are, etc. I love this because we have these firm structure that's been built. So we have that sort of establishment of foundation and connection here in the front. We have the competition and the rivalry in the Five of Wands. All these different creatures, each seems to have a different goal, and they're not communicating, they're not working together, they're in conflict. This Six of Wands is the same image. Well, this figure here is the same image from the cover of the hardbound book that I showed you at the beginning of this video. Very classic external recognition. We have our main hero here being congratulated and like celebrated. And then in the Seven, I like this Seven of Wands. Oftentimes in the Seven of Wands, we're seeing one person or one figure against a bunch of other figures, against 6 other figures. But here, our main character is fighting his way through what looks like a tangle or a dense forest of wands. And so you get the idea that he's kind of lost his way and he's fighting his way through. There's that feeling of like floundering and having to really work for it. The 8, this is such a great 8. One of the lesser known meanings of the 8 of Wands is messages. And we have a little bird up here, a crow, bringing a message. So you get that nod to that meaning, which I love. And then we also have swift action represented. Our central figure is literally swinging the scythe that is going to slice all of these wands down all at once. So there's decisive, fast action happening in this card, which I love that it's departed from the 8 wands streaking across the sky. This Nine of Wands is so emotive to me. It just really speaks to the exhaustion and the almost ready to give up energy that can come up in the Nine of Wands. They're just so like forlorn looking and tired, right? They're guarding their wands, but they're over it. And then our 10 of Wands is actually doing a pretty good job. You know, he doesn't look too happy about it, but he's got all of the 10 wands and he's managing. Oh my gosh, the quartz are so good. Okay, so our Page of Wands is walking on stilts across thin and cracking ice, and that is definitely a Page of Wands sort of thing to do. They're very adventure-oriented and risk-oriented, and this one's no exception. Definitely ready to take lots of risks. Our Knight of Wands is ready to spring into action, also pretty classic. He's on his bug-like creature. I could do without the bugs, I'll be honest. But he's in his bug-like creature, and he is charging ahead on some sort of ferocity-driven exercise. Our Queen of Wands is just so fierce and wild, and I love that wild nature of her. I think it really speaks to Queen of Wands energy. And our King of Wands, still wild, but also in charge, right? Definitely taking on that role of an inspiring leader. I love the cup suit. We see some purples through this suit, which I love this Ace of Cups so much. She's holding this cup close to her heart. Again, we see the blessing of the moon coming down on our central figure into her cup. So there's this idea that this is a good thing, that it's a blessing. Our Two of Cups. There's so much sensuality in this and so much being wrapped up in one another, much like the Lover's card, but much more tenuous and timid in a way. And I just think it's beautiful. The Three of Cups, this is great. This reminds me of like the music players on the Titanic when the Titanic was sinking. It's almost as though they're like, thick or thin, no matter what life throws at us, we're going to stick it out together and find the joy in the moment. And I think that's pretty beautiful. There's a little bit of like all for one kind of energy going on here that I really appreciate. This Four of Cups is freaking fantastic. It's just fantastic. There's all these cups and this person just cannot be bothered. They're like, bye. I think it's interesting that there's a key dangling from their hat. They clearly have everything they could possibly want and need. They've got the key to unlock any doors that they need to unlock. They are dissatisfied and they just don't see how much they have. There's a real taking for granted energy happening in this that I think is just brilliantly executed. And one of my favorite Five of Cups. So in this card, we can see it a couple of ways. These cups are spilled. There's a rose here. And to me, it like almost indicates that he was doing something nice. Like maybe he'd laid out some wine for them to have a nice date. I'm assuming this is his wife. And he's done something nice. The wine has been spilled. And there's 2 wine cups remaining. They could continue on with their date, right? But she's so busy criticizing and looking and pointing out what he's done wrong that she's not seeing that everything's technically okay. She's just focused on how bad everything is. So we can see her as the one who's kind of focused only on the spill and not on what's left. We could also see him being so focused on the spill and not being willing to move away from it, and she's trying to snap some sense into him, you know, like shock some sense into him so that he'll stop wallowing and actually move on with the evening. So there's a number of ways you can look at this, but I just really like how much it strays from what we're usually seeing in the Five of Cups. The Six of Cups is often about revisiting the past and about childhood and about like innocence and like reconnecting. And this little play box, I don't know what you call these, puppet theater box, is so great for that, because you can look at the puppet theater as a way of like revisiting history, because a lot of times those plays would be about things that were historical or mythological. And you could look at it through that lens, and you can also look at it as just the play and the fun-loving environment of it all. Another card I really, really love. So the Seven of Cups is often about trying to choose, right? Like there's just so many different things to pick. We're fantasizing, we're daydreaming, we're somehow like lost in options in a way. And here we have a painter trying to figure out what to paint, and he's kind of can't quite figure out where to put his focus, right? There's paint here, there's cups here, there's a figure back here that is holding the painting, and he's not actually painting them. So there's this idea that he's a little scattered and a little all over the place right now. This Eight of Cups, with the way her hands are up, like I am so over it, is so great to me. Like I'm putting it behind me, like I am done. Like I am past my done point. The Nine of Cups with the genie is great. I mean, it really, really captures the idea of wishes fulfilled and a feeling like you've just made it, like you've got it all. Emotionally, things are grand. And that sort of success vibe of this is so strong. And then the happy family vibes of the Ten of Cups. I love the Page of Cups is tickling the chin of the fish. That is fantastic. I also love that we see the tail fin of a like dolphin or something flipping in the background. Back there in the water. Love that. Our Knight of Cups is obviously connected to the sea and is literally gazing at his cup as he goes in whatever direction his cup will lead him, which is very classic Knight of Cups. Our Queen of Cups is offering this overflowing cup. She's literally trying to catch the drips. It's so overflowing with emotion. Our Queen of Cups has so much emotional nurturing to offer, and she's right there with it here. Our King of Cups, also with a nice full cup, but more in control. Nothing's spilling over, nothing's dripping, right? Like he's got just as much to share, but is just more in mastery of his emotions. Here we have our Ace of Swords. Again, I love it, right? Like just we can cut through all the crud. This is a neat take on the Two of Swords. We usually see a solitary figure with the swords crossed in front of their heart as they're trying to make a decision, for example. And here we see another take on the Two of Swords, which is not uncommon. It's the stalemate way of looking at the card, where you've sort of got this butting head energy. In this case, the butting heads is happening within one central figure, right? Two sides of themselves are kind of warring over the issue. And so you see that energy of like sort of butting heads, which you could look at from a communication standpoint with other people, but you could also look at it as sort of warring with yourself to try to make a decision. Really, really interesting way to look at it. The Three of Cups really hits the, oh, I've just been wounded and now I've got to deal with that and I've got to learn from that and I've got to grow from that. And it was obviously something that came unexpectedly. The rest in this four, I mean, this is just beautiful. One thing that's always struck me about this particular card is she's away from battle. She's gone underground to sort of rest and recuperate. And while she's resting, these three swords are up here just buried in the earth, so they're not ready for action. But she brought one sword with her, so she's ready to spring into action should she need to. She has one sword that is readily available to her. So she's not totally checked out, right? She's still retaining some connection to action. And as I mentioned before, I love the bratty energy of the Five of Swords. This has always struck me as such a Five of Swords thing. It's like you've won, but you've won by being a bully. And you can totally see that in this card in the way that it's been illustrated. I also really love this Six of Swords. So we have a city on fire in the lower left-hand corner of this card. And our figure here has taken their swords and literally left that burning fire city behind and is going over here where things are not on fire, and they've risen above it. So there's this idea of rising above, like rising above all the conflict and all the drama and all the trouble and moving forward. You're still bringing the swords with you, so you're still bringing some of that, you know, baggage and such, but you are getting away from it. This Seven of Swords is like, often we see the trickery or the sneaky sneak of this card. It's like there's so much risk, unnecessary risk taking that happens in the Seven of Swords typically, and I feel like this shows the hazards of doing that. Sure, this guy might make a buck, but what is he risking to do it? You know, sure, you might get away with this shortcut, but what are you risking? Our Eight of Swords, where she feels so trapped because these swords are outside of her window. But like, dude, just don't go out the window then. Go out the door like normal. Like, stop being so dramatic. Like, you're fine. And I feel like this moon, again, shining light down on her is like, hello? There's another way. Like, calm down. That's kind of the energy I get from this card. The Nine of Swords, so much fear, so much anxiety. And here's this little guy nibbling on his shoulder. It just really captures the anxiety feeling of the Nine of Swords. And our Ten of Swords. Again, this is a card. I've talked about this in other videos. I often feel the tens are just that little bit over the top. The nines tend to be like the major lesson learning or the point at which things start to turn around or whatever. The 10 for me always feels like that over the top energy, and the 10 of Swords specifically feels like such high drama. Like, this is somebody who feels super victimized. Like, they're in a box and they're being stabbed by 10 swords. It's like way over the top. It's too much. And while yes, you might be feeling that way, the question is how many of these swords are actually directly impacting you? Well, it's 10 swords, but there's 3 that are being, nope, sorry, I lied. 4 that are actually piercing this figure. The other 6 are just around the figure, right? So it just kind of like, to me, this is often a call to get some perspective. Yes, recognize bad things have or are happening, and you do need to be aware of those things, but like, and deal with them and grow from them and learn from them and heal from them, but also put it in perspective and like dial it back a little on the drama. Here's the Page of Swords. I love how he looks like a regular old page, but then if you look closer, in his eye is this like flashlight magnifying device, it looks like, where he's like really looking at the sword. That detective-y kind of inspector-y energy of the Page of Swords is so great. They're so curious, and I love seeing that energy there. The Knight of Swords, I love that he's like clearly in a space where he's like, I know what's happening, let's go deal with it, and his horse is in the same space. There's this like echo chamber of like, let's make it happen, let's go do the thing, and not necessarily think about it. Our Queen of Swords has already cut a, I almost said a bad word. She's already cut somebody. She's already taken some action. She seems pretty smug. She knows what she's done. She's like, I'm good with it. This just needed to be done. She's very matter of fact. She's not afraid to wield her sword. And our King of Swords looks more collected. He's only holding one sword. He doesn't feel like he needs to overpower anybody. And he's got a little figure here with the globe, sort of indicating to me that there's a certain amount of respect for his authority. And finally, we have our Pentacle suit. Our Ace of Pentacles is the dragon gripping this gorgeous coin. This is such a beautiful card in the deck. I love the vibrant red and black and blue. It's got so much punch. Anyway, it's a really beautiful Ace of Pentacles. The Pentacle suit in general feels very grounded and gorgeous. This is another favorite card from the entire deck. I love the belly dancing vibe. I love that she, instead of trying to juggle her responsibilities, she's dancing with them. She's finding a way to make it all be part of her dance as if it's all intentional and choreographed. So the more that life throws at her, she just finds a way to move with it. Really beautiful way to look at the Two of Pentacles. And I also love this perspective of the Three of Pentacles. Normally we see this collaborative effort towards building something. What I love about this is that this creature is helping this one, this creature is helping this one, and this creature is helping this one. They are literally in a sort of builder's circle jerk, for lack of a better way to say it. I'm sure there's a better way. But they're all part of it, and they're all sort of refining each other as they do this project together. So they're each contributing to the other. Does that make sense? So it's a real teamwork vibe. This is the best. This is a classic image of Memento Mori. Life is short. Here's like this death-like figure with the watch in their hand indicating like time is running out, and this person's carrying and wearing all of their wealth, and there's the flames ready to take them into the afterlife, and this figure's like, dude, like, you're running out of time to enjoy your resources. Like, why are you holding on so tight? This Five of Pentacles, it's very classic. I'm out in the cold, I'm looking for shelter, and there's shelter here, and it's almost like the shelter sees them and they haven't seen it, like they're just oblivious. It's like, it's right here, just go in there, it's fine. The eye's a little creepy in there, but it gets the point across. Here we have the Six of Pentacles, our very lorded like figure up here, up high, with all these pentacles behind their back and offering one meager coin. It really shows, I think, the shadow side of the Six of Pentacles. It's not always about equity here. It's about charity, in this card at least. The Seven of Pentacles is great to me because it's like somebody is growing a crop and they're like bleeding out the tree to kind of check on it. But it's like, if you continue to check on it and poke at it, it's not going to have enough nourishment to nourish the pentacles it's trying to grow. And to me, this speaks to the impatience of trying to like make things go faster because you're impatient. Like you feel like you need to know how things are going to turn out. So you keep like poking at it, and you could just like relax and let it come out the way it's going to come out. I think this comes about from a lack of trust and like a lack of like trusting the process and trusting the work you've done. If this character was trusting the work they'd done, they'd let the tree continue what it's doing and blossom the way it's going to blossom. But because you can see all these other blood spatters, like this character just keeps like poking it to check it, right? Well, yeah, you're draining it. You're defeating your purpose here, which I think it's just a really cool way to look at the Seven of Pentacles, which can be a card that I feel like is not always depicted in unique ways. Love the factory repetitive work vibe of this Eight of Pentacles. You can see mastery of craft here, of course, but you can also see that kind of the grind and the repetition, like literal gears grinding. I mean, there's so much fun ways to look at this card. This Nine of Pentacles, this is one of the more underwhelming cards for me in the deck. Like, I get the idea. They have their little, like, character here that's kind of helping them out, or is their companion, and there's all these pentacles. They're clearly, like, covered. They're comfortable. But it doesn't have that same sort of, like, I'm enjoying my wealth vibe that I typically look for in this card. So this one, it's fine. It's not my favorite. I think that's the only one I really felt like that about out of the whole deck, though, so that's not bad. Here is our Ten of Pentacles. I love this. We have the opulence and we have the wealth that's going to be passed on from generation to generation. But somebody has been neglected and is like just being basically, is only playing with the scraps. The sloppy seconds is somehow not treated equally. They're playing chess on this character's back. So to me, this is usually a call out to like, okay, you might be getting everything you could ever dream of, but whose back have you stepped on to get there? Or who are you neglecting in order to have that? Like, in what way are you not... You know, are you not in a place of ethics with what you've built for yourself? So I just think it's a really interesting way to look at that card. Our Page of Pentacles, this card specifically really informed and influenced the way I would look at the Page of Pentacles forever and ever, because this particular Page of Pentacles is like made up of all these spare parts and is like literally farming some kind of junkyard for more spare parts to attach to themselves. They're very like, this is where I think I first really strongly connected the keyword resourceful with the Page of Pentacles, because this particular page is clearly being resourceful. If they break down, they're going to fix themselves. If they need something added to themselves, they're going to get it and add it. They're going to tinker. And the Page of Pentacles is a tinkerer, right? They're very resourceful. I like this Knight of Pentacles because he reminds me a bit of the Chariot, only he's a full body, not just a head. So he's really in that space of, I'm going to get from point A to point B. And you can really see the influence of the Chariot on this card. And energetically, that makes so much sense because the Chariot card is very driven and purpose-driven and is very like focused. And the Knight of Pentacles is also very purpose-driven and very focused. They're very responsible. They may not get there quickly, but they will get there. They're very reliable in that way. And then the Queen of Pentacles, who is making sure everybody has what they need. Classic. And our King. Nothing to say about him. He's great. So that is the Deviant Moon Tarot. And I hope this deep dive tour through all of the artwork gives you an idea of why I love this deck so much and why I feel like the artwork just gives you so much to work with and to chew on for a reading. It's just a fantastic, fantastic deck. And it works so great for all kinds of readings. But I hope you could see why maybe I might and others might sometimes be drawn to use it to look at things that are a little harder to see, the shadowier side or the kind of dark underbelly of some of these cards. I feel like it just does a really good job of helping you to unpack and see that stuff. Because I feel like a lot of the other decks kind of bury it a little bit more. You have to dig a little harder or push a little bit more to get to those meanings. Whereas in this deck, it just kind of does it for you, you know? And there's just so much visually to play with. And it just inspires me in that way. Even though this is so far from the aesthetic that I feel like I would normally gravitate to. It's just an excellent deck. Very, very well thought out. And this is the kind of thing that I feel like we don't necessarily always see enough of anymore in the tarot world, is decks coming out that have every single card has just had a ton of thought put into it. I mean, and you can tell when you get into the big book that Patrick, many of these cards had many iterations before the final version eventually was solidified. And I think that thoughtfulness and that care shows in the final product. So this remains a very favorite deck in my collection, and one that is a powerhouse for readings. I very rarely will reach for this for clients, but when I have, on that rare occasion, it's been incredibly potent and powerful, and I've never regretted it. But it is a particular vibe, so I totally get it. If it's not your cup of tea, don't let my raving and raving about how awesome it is change that. It's fine. If you get a chance to look at a copy in person, or if you find yourself curious and want to just give it a shot, it is a mass market deck, so it's pretty affordable. I keep turning this into the place where there's glare. I'm still sorting out my lighting lately, so anyway. But yeah, if you find yourself kind of curious, I feel like it's the kind of deck that's probably worth checking out. If you can afford it and it's no big deal, then yeah, check it out in person, see if you feel any different. You might not. I've heard from people who've had the same experience I have, where they kind of hated it and then they got it and they really fell in love with it like I have. But I've also heard from people who thought that was going to be their experience and it totally wasn't. They hated it just as much when they got it as they did beforehand. And I feel like with art, that's just the way it is. I feel like good art should be kind of polarizing, right? There should be people that really, really are drawn to it and people that are kind of repulsed by it. Because if it's not doing either of those, if it's not repulsing some people, it's probably also not really, really charming the pants off of other people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like art should provoke us for good or for bad, you know? And this deck is very pokey and provoky, and I love that about it. So that is the Deviant Moon Tarot. Thank you for coming along with me while I took you on this journey and talked about my experiences with it. It remains a long-time deck love for me, and it's definitely a deck that has never, to the best of my knowledge, ever been in jeopardy in my collection. It's one that I continue to go to again and again. I love working with in the darker half of the year, or whenever I need a good kick in the butt. This is the deck I go to. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me. As always, an extra big thank you to my Unicorn Fam channel members for supporting the work that I do here in really meaningful ways. I really, really appreciate you guys so much. To everybody watching this channel, thank you. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for watching my videos, for engaging with my content. Your likes and subscribes and comments, they all do so much to help me and to support the work that I put into the channel. It really, really does make a difference, and I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I would love to hear your thoughts on the Deviant Moon Tarot down below. Have a good rest of your day, wherever you might be, and may your magic always shine from the inside out. Bye!